channel and on Canvas. So speak freely, participate freely, etc. And today we are going to be talking about design documents, in other words, a bunch of background for one of your upcoming assignments, and also pitching, how to communicate your game ideas to others. Today is kind of like the communications lecture. We're going to try and keep it really interesting and tailored to games though, so hopefully there's some interesting content here for you today. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, as I said, kind of communicating your ideas both within your team internally and externally, whether that's to players, to publishers, to potential investors, and things like that. We're going to be talking about game design documents. There's often referred to as GDDs, and there's many different formats. It's basically like the Bible for your game's design, in other words. We'll look at some examples of that. We're also going to talk about pitching, so how to pitch an idea to someone, how to pitch your game concept to someone, how to kind of sell your ideas and present, and some public speaking tips in general. We're also going to talk about a brief introduction to your GDD assignments. The first one will be coming up for your second GDW challenge project in the next few weeks, and you'll have another one kind of later in the semester as well. So without further ado, let's get to talking about game design documents, aka GDDs. What are they? What are they used for? What goes inside of them? And how do you make one? So a GDD is a written record of your game's design. It's comprehensive. In other words, it covers all aspects of your game, things like mechanics, art style, who your target audience is, and so on. It talks extensively about the gameplay in your game, what are the rules, what are your core gameplay loops, and that sort of thing. It talks about your game's narrative, if that's applicable, art direction, things like that, and often includes some things about technical details. For example, what platforms are you running on, what engine are you using, maybe a little bit about some of the architecture of your code, as well as a high-level business strategy. So if you're planning to sell your game, where are you planning to distribute it, and that sort of thing. GDDs are, generally speaking, collaborative. They're not just the effort of the game designer. On a small team, everyone will contribute to them. For the purposes of the game design document assignments in this class, it's expected that everyone on your team will contribute equally to the document. And it's not just something for designers. Now, if you are a game designer, you will probably take the lead on sections related to things like gameplay and the rules of your game and who your target audience is. But, you know, artists, programmers, team managers, they all have a role to play. So maybe your programmer takes the lead on kind of the technical details section. Your artist takes the lead on art and sound design. If you've got a writer, they'll take the lead on the narrative section, and so on and so forth. So you might be wondering why you'd want to make a game design document other than to fulfill the requirements of your assignments in this class. But GDDs can be really helpful both internally to your team and externally. And that's especially true once you get to larger projects beyond, you know, a few weeks project in GDW. So this is something that will become especially helpful as you start working on larger projects. So the most important reason for a GDD is to be able to communicate ideas within your team. So internally, the function of a GDD is to help keep your thoughts organized and to keep everyone on the same page, so to speak. So make sure that everyone has the exact same understanding of your game's rules. Make sure that if you're making a change to your art direction or something like that, it's reflected in the document so that everyone on the team knows exactly what's going on. And if you're thinking, hey, what did we say we were going to do with, you know, in level 4, what we were going to do with that pipe that we put in the level that the player can, those kinds of questions should be answerable by reading your GDD. It reduces the need for constantly going back and forth between team members going, wait, I thought we agreed on this. No, I thought we agreed on this. It's a way of preventing that and keeping your thoughts organized. It also provides, you'll often hear it referred to as kind of a quote unquote Bible to help guide development. So as you're working on your prototype and things like that, it will help provide details that you need to flesh out your game as you first envisioned it. So externally, there's also a function to a GDD. It's not just about communicating inside your team. It's also about communicating to people outside your team. So externally, a GDD might be something that you would show to publishers that you're looking to get funding from. from, or show to a distributor who's interested in distributing your game. You'll need a GDD, for example, if you want to try and get a game on the Switch or the Xbox or the PlayStation, so that you can actually obtain an SDK from Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo to be able to develop on their platform. It's also really helpful for assignments and pitches, and if you're going to conferences and things like that, because if you do a GDD well, which you should, you'll have material that you can pull and reuse for things like presenting your game to other people, marketing materials, so, making a banner for a Steam page or something like that. Or if you're going to a conference or a convention like PAX or MIGS, once the plague is over, then you can pull things for brochures and posters and things like that. So what goes into a GDD? Really, it is completely up to you to an extent, though we are going to talk about kind of the basic structure of a GDD and some of the things that are commonly included. But in essence, your GDD should contain all of the information needed to create your game. Really minuscule things like what, individual sprites look like, or something like that isn't necessarily going to be in your GDD, but based on your GDD, someone should be able to create what you might call a facsimile of your game, something with the same rules, the same visual style. There should be enough detail in your GDD to clearly imagine what your game is going to be like. So from just looking at your game design document, someone who has never heard of your idea before should be able to get a really detailed idea of what the final game will be like, what it will look like, what it will sound like, most importantly, what it will play like, what the story is, all of that information. However, this isn't to say that the GDD needs to be fixed in stone at the beginning of your development. It should change throughout development. Remember, we talked about the idea of iterative development, where you kind of change your prototype and your ideas as you proceed, figuring out what works and what doesn't. Those changes that you make during iterative development should be reflected in your game design document as well. Some other things that can go into a game design document are kind of planning metrics. So things like a timeline for your development, a plan for when you're going to do what, milestones, when do we want to have iteration 1 finished, when do we want to have iteration 2 finished, and so on. And you might also have something called an asset list. So we'll look at some examples of that a bit later, what is an asset list. But that's basically a list of everything that you need to make for your game. So sprites, 3D models, music, pieces of writing, and things like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the original pitch or design document for Diablo, which was created in 1994 by Condor. And there is a link in the lecture slides. So what I want to do for the next 5 minutes or so is open this link in your copy of the lecture slides, kind of go through the document, and post in chat anything you notice about the document, anything interesting, anything you think might be missing, that sort of thing. Just let me know what you notice, knowing that Diablo turned into the huge phenomenon that it did. And feel free to press, F in the chat if you'd like to share some of your insights out loud. And we'll take a look at that together in a moment. If you download the slides, there is a link. I'll post it in the chat as well. So here's the link. Stephen?
So on the third rightmost page, I noticed like a diagram of the electronic within like the page. It's like that's quite interesting because of game development, you're supposed to work on the game, not on the electronics.
Oh, no, the that diagram is actually for the level design.
Oh, that's
So
a
it's
level
just kind of to
design.
show off the layers and the isometric viewpoint.
Oh, sorry. It looks like a circuit board from
Yeah, no,
here.
from a distance it does. Yeah, I recommend hitting the jump and then zooming in.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Okay, so we've got some more ideas here in the chat. Hi there.
Yeah, just noticed that a lot of well, I wouldn't say a lot, but a lot of it, I don't know if it's stock art or if it's art taken from somewhere else, but it looks like they didn't have a strict, a lot of art assets to show off the art style. So they were pulling from other things that they had, such as like the image of looks like a werewolf at the very bottom of the 5th page. So they're just pulling from whatever they can to help explain and help sell the feel and the vision that they're going for, even though they don't have anything they can actually show at that point.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's actually something that is, generally speaking, perfectly acceptable to do in a game design document, since you should be creating it at first, long before you've really gotten all of your final assets. So pulling in visual material from kind of other sources to help convey the mood that you're trying to go for with your game can be a great strategy. Gabriel?
Just looking at the development schedule they show on the last page, it's really cool how they
Yep.
have like the setup of the initial stages and what's being developed per specific month and all how it's planned out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm actually going to switch over to a different tab so that we can see what people are talking about on my screen together. So this is the timeline that Gabriel was just talking about.
Yeah, I also have an input on that.
Yep.
So the design starts at the beginning, and it's 2 months, and then it's done for the rest of it. Is what it looks like here, but I'm assuming that they're adding stuff as they go through.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. Since this was 1994, I wouldn't actually be that surprised if this was the intention. Design happens for 2 months and then it's art and programming, and that is it. The design does not change. That kind of development is referred to in project management as a waterfall, where everything kind of happens sequentially. Modern game development isn't like that at all, and it's generally accepted now that this is a bad way to do things. Your design should be evolving as you proceed through the project. So that's a great point. This is actually one of the things, in addition to the coffee stains and the screen printed, like poorly photocopied graphics that really show the age of the document. Ariana? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just
Josh,
wanted
you have
to.
something else to. Sorry there.
Oh.
I think we were lagging a bit.
No, it's all right.
Oh, okay. Ariana, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is that those images of the demons are actual illustrations I've seen on the internet. Like one of the gargoyles there, that would be Belphegor, one of the demons from the Bible there, who represents the sin of sloth there.
Yeah, so another point about kind of these images that are used throughout the document, maybe being taken from other sources, wood engravings and that sort of thing, just to kind of convey some of the imagery of the game as appealing to, the themes of hell and demons and that sort of thing.
Indeed, yeah, that's what I noticed the most there.
Yeah. Nicholas?
So I don't know if anyone else has played the original Diablos or anything, but like when I read through a lot of things on like the game design and such, I noticed that Diablo was originally supposed to be a turn-based game, which if anyone's played it, it's definitely not. And there's a lot of other things I'm like, did that really go like that? I don't think that's what they did. Or like for example, like as I said earlier, so it was supposed to be turn-based, which that got changed. It was dynamic random level generation. I don't know if that was necessarily entirely how it ended up, because I don't remember it being entirely like dynamic random levels. I just remember being you go through dungeon, you win dungeon. There's a lot of things on like the document of what they were planning to do, and a lot of it didn't necessarily go through or was changed.
That's a great point. Great observation. I forget which page it's on here. I think it's in the gameplay section, but it does mention a couple of times that the combat is turn-based, and as we all know, Diablo is not actually a turn-based game. So this being the original pitch or design document doesn't it doesn't reflect the final design of the game. And that's something important to understand as well. Remember the fact that we talked about how your design document should change just like your game would. I assume, and I don't have a source for this, I haven't seen a more updated version of this design document for Diablo. You might be able to find it online, that this document would have changed once, funding was acquired and development actually started. And as we pointed out before with that timeline on the last page, this design bit that only took the first couple months probably did end up, happening in stops and starts throughout development as they worked out whether they wanted it to be action or turn-based or anything like that. Oh, there's a video explaining the change. That's fantastic. It's definitely something to check out if you're interested. That Hyder just linked in the chat. So yeah, this kind of reflects the fact that the original document that you have that you might use to obtain funding or something like that can and will change as your game's design changes. And this timeline that you have here that, Condor had here isn't going to always be entirely accurate. So when you're planning out your own timelines, I would say probably the chief thing you can do is make sure you're not having this naive idea that design is only going to happen in the first couple of months. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the lecture slides now. And there's a couple other design documents that we're going to quickly scroll through in talking about different formats of GDDs as well. But what did you notice kind of about the format of this document? How would you describe it? Very organized, sure. It's got kind of these definite headings for all of these different sections. Like an instruction manual, that's a great comparison, Connor. Point form paragraphs, right, kind of summarizing, getting to the point quickly. Unholy, very funny. It's trying to sell an idea. Yep, you can see that this design document in particular was really intended to share with outside audiences. Very serious, feels businessy, allows for some wiggle room, very formal, kind of boring. Yeah, I agree. Blunt and direct with its descriptions, very specific so you can imagine playing. Yeah, fantastic, all great points. So basically, in terms of kind of looking at the standard formats for different GDDs, the Diablo document that we just looked at falls into the category of what I call the traditional X pager, and that's often called the 10 pager because it's usually about 10 pages. So for a large commercial project, it can be much larger. I would not be surprised if Ariana is an example of Wario Land 4 having over 400 pages. It's probably not that uncommon as you might think. Usually the X pager format is primarily text. It's written as kind of a sectioned report. So that idea of it being an instruction manual with different sections for different parts of the game. This is very traditional, very formal, kind of stuffy, can be kind of boring, but it can be really good for kind of just getting an information dump out with lots of text. There's a one-page format that's a lot more modern. It's usually not one letter page. It's usually kind of a large poster format, usually something, like 3 by 4 feet, something like that, maybe a meter on edge in metric, that summarizes kind of all aspects of the game. So maybe you've got a little section for story and a little section for art and a little section for gameplay. It's typically really, really visual. So you'll have a collection of graphics in addition to text. Usually in the final version or the presentable version of a one-pager, it will be original graphics. So things like concept art and icons and screenshots of assets and that sort of thing. There's also an online format that's commonly used for a GDD, where at a large company you'll have something like a wiki for your documentation that's shared on a server collaboratively that everyone can just kind of edit at any time and displays in your browser so that you can navigate to individual pages for more organization rather than just having, that 400-page information dump in a big PDF file. So this is great for really big projects. There's often quite a bit of setup overhead with getting everything online and making sure you have a system set up for collaboration, secure access, and all of that. But it is really useful for large projects. And I would say now, since we're all working remotely, this might be something that you want to look into for your GDW group if you're so inclined, though it will take a bit more time to set up. You can do something kind of similar to this, just with a shared Google Drive folder and a bunch of articles that sort of hyperlink to each other that are Google Docs or even slides or something like that. So it really is up to you. Though these are 3 kind of common formats that we'll be looking at, the format of a GDD is not fixed in stone. You can kind of do whatever works for your team as long as it's organized and presentable. So the things that go into a GDD that kind of supplement the information that is there, you might have things like sketches of level or board designs, depending on the type of game you're making. And it's a good reference both for the team and the external reader. So those little kind of very rough sketches of the isometric layout in Diablo that are in the document, they help to give you an idea of what the game's going to look like. This might also include things like puzzle designs, the geometric layout of a level where you're putting buildings in a virtual world and that sort of thing, how you're going to set up a game board if you're making a game board, and so forth. These sketches in a GDD, what you want to prioritize is clear communication, not really polish or flair, having cool shading and pretty colors and all of that. It's more about conveying the information of how things are going to work. It's also pretty common to see storyboards. So we talked about storyboarding last week as a prototyping method, basically like an outline of what's going to happen in a cutscene, or how players perform a specific combo in combat, that sort of thing, how a game round flows from picking a character to duking it out to winning a match, that sort of thing. There's also the concept of a blueprint. We'll look at an example of that in a moment. A blueprint is basically a sequential breakdown of key activities that a player will complete. So you start the level, you do thing A, then you do thing B, then you do thing C. And like I said, we'll look at an example of that in a moment. It's on slide 13 for your reference. So now I just want to take another 10 minutes. There's a couple links here, and I will post them in the chat as well. The kind of 10-pager or X-pager format is probably not right. It's probably the most common one that you will see when you're looking for commercial examples online. So here in the chat and in the slides is a link to the Doom design document, or the Doom Bible as it's called, and the original kind of BioShock pitch/design document, sort of similar to the Diablo document in terms of its intent, whereas the Doom Bible is more of an internal document. So I want you to have a couple minutes to kind of look at those now. And again, if you have anything to share about kind of what you're finding, feel free to just post in chat. And especially, I'd like you to look at maybe some of the differences that you see between these and the Diablo document that we looked at. The Doom Bible is from around the same time. The BioShock document is, about 10 years later. Stephen?
So throughout the game document, I've noticed that the cover is usually very appealing, just to take in the interest of their their business partners in future.
Yeah. And something you'll notice in general too, as kind of a rule of thumb, is that a document that's intended for external use will usually have document that's intended for internal use. So Ethan commented that there do be a lot of empty space in the Doom one, and indeed there do. That's really kind of an organizational choice. So the Doom Bible is more of an internal document used for reference. You'll notice if I just go back here, the cover to the Doom Bible is kind of very plain as well. It's got a sprite on it, but that's about it. We flipped to the BioShock one, and it's got a bunch of effort put into kind of making, the cover look really grungy and having a bit of the aesthetic that they're going for in the game, having kind of more polished visuals and design of the pages in the design document. And that's just because it is more intended for kind of sharing externally and talking to publishers and that sort of thing. I'd also like to just draw your attention to the organization in the Doom document. So I'm going to go ahead and change the window that I'm presenting right now. And I guess the direction in Doom changed as well. So this is this revision is from 1992, and this is something just before we talk about the. You can see there's a revision number on the cover here, and this is from November of 1992, so before some of the final changes to Doom were made. The idea of kind of having version numbers for your design documentation is something it's really good. It's kind of it's not as necessary now because we have things like source control, and Google checks your version history automatically, so you no longer have to just make a bunch of copies of a document that have different version numbers on them. But this idea of kind of keeping track of different versions, different changes, and letting the document evolve over time is something that's really important in terms of creating a successful design document that will be useful to you internally, because it allows you to make those changes and have that flexibility. Okay, so if we have a quick look at the table of contents here, and this is indexed by section number rather than page number, but that's fine. If you were making one of these today, obviously you just make all of these hyperlinks within the document, but we can see a lot of the information about the game that's contained in this document. So we've got kind of the gameplay loop is contained here. There's some information after kind of the general information of the game loop, and that there's information on the planned main characters for the game, and then really detailed information on kind of the story for each of the sections of the game. And you can also see kind of marks in the document where changes were made and that sort of thing. So we can see that this is really text heavy. It's kind of going through a lot of detail. And if you were to look at this as someone who was completely unfamiliar with the game, you could get a really clear picture of what Doom would look like, at least in this revision of the document before some of those changes to the design were made. However, it's not really flashy. It's not really something that you would show to a publisher and say, give us money. Oh, this is, by the way, an example of an asset list. So in section 7.3.2, and there's different lists for kind of the different pieces of the game. You can see that there's all of these indications, just kind of a list of things that need to be made. So different models and textures and that sort of thing. And that's the idea of an asset list that basically gives your artists an idea of everything that has to be made to complete the game. And it also gives you an idea of kind of how far along you are in terms of making all of those assets throughout development, as opposed to just saying, well, we made a bunch of weapons and that's it. Now, if we contrast the Doom document to the BioShock document, it immediately becomes clear that this document is trying to make money, right? It's trying to sell the pitch to a publisher or things like that. The very first page, rather than just giving an outline of what's going to be in the document, it grabs you. It says, things grow inside of you. We're part of you now. You think you hear them say. It's really trying to hook the reader's attention. It's less so about specifying all the internal components of the design and more so about selling to a publisher. Does anybody else have any thoughts on either of these documents? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the lecture slides now, and sorry for all of the switching around. This would be so much better if I had a projector, but that's how it is now. So basically, kind of irrespective of the format that you're following, you really do want to make sure that when you're creating your design document, you're keeping in mind its intended purpose. So for the GDDs that you'll be creating for this course, I want them to be kind of both functional and presentable, right? So they should be conveying enough information internally to your team to keep everyone on the same page, but they should also make the reader excited about your idea. Essentially, I want you to strike kind of a middle ground between the Doom document and the BioShock document, where there's a lot of detail that will make it clear what your project is all about, but it also helps get the reader kind of excited and interested to play the game that you'll be creating. So to look at some other formats really quick, I'm actually going to show you some examples of design documents that I've made previously with my team following different formats. So this is an example of the one-page design doc. Like I said, the one page is a little bit of a misnomer. It's generally speaking a very, very large page that is kind of poster format, poster sized. This was from a bit later in the development of our prototype, so we already had some screenshots in there in addition to concept art and an explanation of kind of our game loop or our core mechanics, if you would like to call that section that. So this is the kind of one-page type format, a little bit more modern, generally speaking, a little bit more eye-catching than a 10-page document. You can follow any format you want for the GDD assignments in this course. So if you're kind of highly visual, I would probably recommend trying out a one-page format. If you're more kind of methodical and want to set out every section and focus on the writing, I'd say the X-Pager is your best bet. So another format, this is more of a supplement to a traditional game design document or a way to kind of lay out the sections of your game if you're doing a very linear game, is the idea of blueprints. So remember how I said that a blueprint kind of slices the player's experience into chunks that happen one after the other? There's a link here in case it's a bit difficult to see on the slides right now. But basically, this was a blueprint that we made for the first level of the game that we were working on, the same game that was in that one-page document. And what you do in a blueprint is you kind of section out your level. And in this case, we were saying, how long does the opening cutscene take? And then how long does the tutorial section where we kind of teach the player how to move around and what the core mechanics of the game are, how long should that take? How long should it take them to navigate the rest of the level, and so forth. And then you can just kind of decide what information you want to specify for each of those sections. In our case, we talked about the location, the player's core objective for that section, the color palette that we would be using for our visual direction of kind of the cinematics of that section, and then key story beats, what the character's mindset would be, the mood that we wanted the player to have. All of those sort of details is something that you can put into a blueprint. So if you're making a really linear game, especially kind of a single player linear experience where the player is going to be going through various story beats or something like that, this can be a really helpful format for that. If you're making a game like Rocket League, something that's, competitive and fast paced, probably not so much, though you could try and make a blueprint, for example, the typical progress of like a match or a round of your game, and that could work as well. This is another example, again, from the same game, just to kind of show you the same game, 3 different formats type of thing. And all of these are links if you want to take a closer look. This is an example of kind of a living document in the X-Pager format. So kind of that more boring, if you want to call it that, text format, where we basically kind of have a really simple outline that talks about all the planned areas in the game, all the planned unlockables and that sort of thing, that we just plopped into a text document. Some of it was unfinished at the time. Some of it was subject to change. We were highlighting some things that we were working on, revising, and so forth. Where can you acquire this game? We never actually released it. I do have a zip floating around somewhere of the demo that we had at PAX that I could distribute later. It's free. So I'll link. I will link that later. And yes, you know what? I can tell you guys a bit about the time we went to PAX later as well. I think that's kind of an interesting little lesson in public speaking and sharing your game with others and that sort of thing. So just remind me in Discord later, and I'll link it for you guys. Okay, so the idea of the living document, which was that last example that I showed, is that your GDD should evolve and change throughout your project. As we said, game development is iterative. The documents that you have for your game's design, they should be iterated and changed over time as well. So anytime you make a decision about your game, whether that decision is a small tweak you make because of a playtest or a huge tweak that you make after 48 hours of nonstop arguing among your design team, that change should be reflected in your game design document. The purpose of this is obviously to keep that information up to date, to keep your team up to date, to keep any external parties that you're sharing your documentation with up to date, and to make sure that, when you're pulling marketing materials out of your GDD, that you're going to have to do as little work as possible to make those current, because you're already completely overworked all of the time and burnt out because you're a game developer, and that is life. The versioning is, as I said, it used to be more important to do this manually to kind of indicate what version your document was, but these days you'll want to pick an automatic solution for that. So you can have a change list in your document that you instrument manually with, we changed from a turn-based RPG to an action RPG on November the 7th, 1995. Or these days you can use versioning in a tool like Google Docs, or you can use source control. I don't know if this has been introduced in your programming classes yet. I hope it has. If not, for anyone that's curious, I'd be happy to have a chat about it in Discord. Basically an automatic way to both back up your files in the cloud and keep track of which versions were changed and when. It's really commonly used in programming projects. And if you're in the game programming club, you'll probably get an intro to that soon in a club meeting as well. So on to the content that you will generally have in your GDD. There's a few sections or types of information that you want to find in absolutely every GDD, more or less, and that is a summary of your design at a high level, who your target audience is, what your gameplay is like, and an asset list. And that asset list is really kind of more important for internal use as opposed to external use for tracking what you actually need to make for your game. Now, as needed, depending on the game that you're making, you might have sections for characters, story, world, art style, sound design, legal information, marketing information, information on platforms, distribution, that sort of thing. This isn't necessarily going to be appropriate for all projects. If you're making a board game, you're not going to have information about your platform. If you're making an action arcade game, you probably won't have a lot of information about characters and story. If you're making a game that is based on, if you're making a rhythm game, you might have a really short section on art style and a really long section on sound design. It is up to you. I'm not going to hand you a list of 10 things and say, this is what has to be in your GDD and each one has to be a page. It really depends on your project. So we're going to take a look at each of these sections in detail now, starting with the ones that are pretty much essentials for all projects, and then taking a look at some of the ones that may be applicable to your project or maybe not, depending on what you specifically are doing in GDW or your personal projects or your future GDW projects, basically whenever you kind of need to have design documentation. All right, so the design summary is basically your team's vision for the game. If you're familiar with business lingo and you've ever written a business report, this is kind of like analogous to an executive summary that just talks about what's going on with the company, its planned vision, and things like that. So the design summary of a GDD should be relatively short. It's usually around a page, and it should kind of convey really high-level things about your game. So the premise of a game, if we remember the dramatic elements of games, high-level gameplay, unique features, and the intended experience of your game. So obviously you can include more details as necessary, but this is really all you need to convey your design summary. And for a small project, the design summary might just basically be a paragraph that says, this is our game, this is what you do and why, and this is the experience we want people to have. That is it. Keep it short. It's more effective for a design summary. It's also pretty common to include a log line. So a log line is a single sentence description of your game that basically kind of summarizes in just a few words what your game is all about. In your design summary, you'll also include some really basic information like whether you're making a board game or a digital game, basically like the genre of the game that you're making. Okay, the target audience section, another one of those essential sections. And I know this is a little bit of admin stuff. We'll get to some more interactive activity stuff later in the lecture. So in the target audience section, you'll basically talk about who your target player is. And this can be things like the age of your target player, where they live, the cultural background that they have, the past experience that they have playing games, what their preferences are in terms of the genres that they usually play, and things like that. It can be really useful sometimes depending on the type of game that you're making. If you're targeting a really specific player, like, you're targeting someone who's a veteran of MOBAs who really likes simulation games, something really specific like that, you might want to create a persona. So this is an imaginary player for your game who has a name and a backstory. Like, for example, let's say that you're making the next League of Legends and you say, our target player is Jane. She's 36. She's a hardened criminal with a history of, violent offenses inspired by throwing her keyboard due to League of Legends, fury, and this is who we want to be playing our game. That kind of thing. You get the idea. So in terms of your target audience, you'll want to answer questions like what platforms they usually play on, if they play lots of board games. In the case of your GDW project, since I believe your first GDW project is kind of centered on putting a twist on a board game. It can include a competitive analysis of similar games. So you might look at some games that have a similar target audience or a similar core experience to yours and say, what are we doing that's similar to these? What are we doing that's different? And that kind of thing. You'll generally speaking want to do a really brief outline of top games in the same space. Think of it as gathering intel on your competition so that you know how you can get the better of them and become the new top League of Legends. And it can also compare features of your game to other games as well, as I said. So moving on to what I think is the most exciting of the mandatory sections of the game design document, gameplay. This is where we get to the actual game design. We're skipping over some of that boring business stuff about the target market and blah blah blah. It's important, don't get me wrong, but I think this is where the game design really starts to shine. So in your gameplay section, you will generally have a core gameplay loop, and hopefully we all remember what that is from last week. We'll be talking again a bit more about the core loop next week when we get into how game interactions work and that sort of thing. You will also have a detailed description of the game's function, i.e., a rule set. So how do you play? What can players do? What are the actions that players are allowed to take? How is the game scored? If there is a scoring system, how do you win? If there is no ending state, kind of, what's the player's goal? What do they feel at the end of the experience? What are they working towards? For board games specifically, or for digital adaptations of board games, you'll be looking at having a rule set, the design of your board, an outline of the pieces or cards that you'll need. If you have like a tile-based board, how the tiles work, all of that sort of thing. So what the physical components of your game are and how they work together. For digital games, you'll have things like what the player's abilities are, the designs of different levels, and that sort of thing. You might have an indication of what the control bindings are, what your UI looks like, what your heads-up display looks like, and all of that good stuff. This section is typically the biggest section of a game design document. It can be a real behemoth. So you'll often have subsections in the gameplay section for things like controls and UI and, level design part 1, level design part 2, for different chapters of your game and things like that. For your GDW projects, for kind of your first GDD assignment in this class, your gameplay section isn't necessarily going to be like 5 pages info dump because you are working on smaller projects. But as you work on larger projects, generally speaking, this is one of the sections of the game design document that really blows up. If you're making a huge commercial game, the target audience section of your document is probably still going to be pretty short. You're just talking about who your target player is. Might be a couple pages. The gameplay section, on the other hand, if you're talking about, enumerating level designs in a platformer or something like that, the gameplay section is really what blows up. So this section especially needs to be really well organized, both for internal reference and for external presentation. Okay, the asset list. This is that example that we looked at in the Doom document as well that had kind of that list of weapons and environment textures and all that stuff that needed to be made. So an asset list is basically everything that needs to be made to finish the game. So for board games, an asset list might be something like this. It will list out your board and all of the different pieces that have to be fabricated, any cards that have to be printed, instructions, packaging, box art, all of that sort of stuff. For digital games, this list will be even bigger. So models for a 3D game, textures or sprites, both for kind of in-game characters and maybe your UI, even you got to draw your health bar and you got to draw all these little icons. All of this stuff needs to be included in the asset list of a digital game. This can also be things like written text or data files. So even scripts for cutscenes or kind of little files that you need to load in during the game to, execute actions, or little mod files or everything like that is something that needs to be on your asset list for a digital game. And there's other things that can go into this as well. So things like sound files for music and background effects and that sort of thing. All of this is something that will go into your asset list. So moving on to those optional sections now that might apply to your games or might not, depending on what you're making, let's talk a bit about narrative. And we will be going into narrative a lot more in depth. We'll have an entire lecture on narrative later in the course. But just to get you started, if these sections do apply to your GDW projects for your upcoming assignments, here's what you'll want to put inside of them. So in the character section, you basically want to answer the question, who are the characters in your game? What are their personalities? What is their function in the story of your game? And so on. So you'll want to describe some relevant details of your characters here, whether it's what they look like, what they can do, kind of what their personality traits are, and that sort of thing. For playable characters, you'll generally speaking want to flesh those out even more, since those are the characters that your players will spend the most time interacting with, since your player actually takes on the role of that character during their experience. So for playable characters, you might have things like special attributes that affect gameplay. So does this character have some kind of special ability that sets apart the play style that players will have if they choose a different character? So if you've got something like a JRPG, like a Bravely Default or a Final Fantasy, where you have different controllable party members that might have different abilities or might be different, like kind of uniquely suited to different play styles, that is something that you'll want to lay out in this section. For NPCs, you'll want to focus on what those NPCs' interactions are with the player. So what role they serve in terms of the player's core experience. You'll also want to outline any significance to the story, and this is obviously true of playable characters as well, but for NPCs, since it's not someone that the player will directly be taking control of, you want to focus on how that NPC will affect your player's experience, both in terms of their interactions and how they help to shape the story that your players will be kind of, experiencing as they go through your game. So moving on to story, this is another section that you might have in your GDD. If your game has a set narrative or some kind of maybe lore that the player is going to notice unfolding in the background as they play, and that sort of thing. So this section of a GDD should provide an overview of the narrative in your game. It should include a synopsis, so that's kind of a high-level summary of your game's plot, what happens during the runtime of your game, and generally speaking, you want to provide a more detailed outline as well. You might not necessarily have this at the very beginning of development. This is one of those things that will likely get filled in as you sort of iterate on your game's design and your design documentation as you work on your game. So some of the things that you could include in this section could be things like lore details and backstory. So if you look at a game where during play, you don't really have a story that unfolds, something like a League of Legends or a Dota, there's still lore to the world that happens in the background or that kind of forms the backstory for a game. Overwatch is another great example of a game that's got a lot of backstory, but not a lot of narrative that unfolds during play. Those sort of details are still things that you definitely want to include in your game's design document. You might also include things like subplots occurring alongside the main story. So even if your playable characters are experiencing one story, if there's kind of subplots that you can observe other characters in the game experiencing as well, things like characters and side quests, that's also something you want to include in this section. So world is the final section that I would kind of include in the trifecta of narrative related sections, those being character, story, and world. So in your world section, you will have things like the world's geography, key locations, what the environments are like, what the ambience is like, what the atmosphere is like as the player is kind of navigating through your game's world. So you might include things like a map. You might have players' routes through that map, objective locations. So let's say you're drawing a map of Skyrim, maybe you'll try and plot what the average player's journey will be from town to town as they work through the main quest, that sort of thing. Just kind of an indication at a high level of what you expect the average player's exploration of your game's world will look like. You can also include detail on things like weather, climate, day-night cycle. Not every game is going to obviously have these kind of complex mechanics in the design of its world, but if you're creating a game that does have a really fleshed out world, then this sort of thing can be really important to the player's experience, and it's something you want to outline in your game design document so that you can envision what that is going to be like, and so that you can refer to it when the time actually comes to flesh out your game's world in your final project. So you can also include notes here on society, culture for populated worlds, and there will be some overlap here between this section and your narrative section in terms of lore and story background and that sort of thing. So moving on now to some of the other sections you might see in a game design document. One is marketing and legal information. So this is the stuff that's super exciting to you if you wanted to be a business major, and maybe otherwise you're going to have to try hard to stay awake for the next couple of minutes. I fall a bit more on the second side of that, but this still is really important stuff. So in this section, you might answer questions like, how will you distribute your game? So are you planning to go for Steam? Are you planning to go for Humble Bundle? Are you planning to distribute from your own website? Are you going to, try to get a physical disc on Kickstarter because you're going for the retro crowd? And, why can't we have physical copies of games anymore? This is a travesty, that kind of thing. So you'll also want to answer questions like whether you're planning to work with a publisher. Are you going to self-start? Are you going to go for government grants? Are you going to go for crowdfunding? What stores are you planning to release on? All of this sort of details. This is something that you'll obviously find in a business plan, but it doesn't hurt to kind of have this detail in your game design document as well. And, if you're working as an indie studio and you're not incorporated yet and you're not really thinking too much about the business mindset, if you don't have a full business plan, then having these sections in your game design document can kind of help to flesh out that part of your management without necessitating that you go and hire an accountant and get a shareholders agreement and all of that other stuff. So if there's any obligations that you need to address with respect to legal questions or IP, so for example, if you're using any licensed content, if you're making a sequel to a franchise that was originally developed by someone else, those concerns should be addressed in this section as well. Things like copyright, trademark, things like licensing agreements, a reference to those so that your team has kind of a single point of contact to go, wait, are we allowed to do this with these characters, or are we going to get sued? That is something that you want to have referenced in this section of your game design document. Technical specifications, another one of those kind of ending sections to the document. Here you might have details on which platforms you're going to support. Is it PC? Is it mobile? Is it consoles? Is it a combination thereof? Are you going for VR? That sort of thing. And then any platform specific details that don't fit elsewhere in the document. So you might have things like different control schemes for different platforms in the gameplay section, or you might have them in this section. It's really up to you. You might also have system requirements in this section. So once you're kind of working on actual digital projects, and you're benchmarking those on different machines, and you figure out that one of your group's laptops is running your game at 2 FPS because apparently you need a NASA computer to render all of the awesome particle effects that you made in your game, you can use that type of information to update the system requirements that you keep track of in your technical specifications. And then when the time comes to actually release your game on Steam, instead of throwing darts at a board and just saying, we think you need 8 gigabytes of RAM and a video card with 2 gigabytes of VRAM, but we don't really know. You can refer to this and then have system requirements that will give your users a good picture of the type of specs that they will need to run your game effectively. So I know that was a huge information dump. That's basically the details on kind of all the generic GDD sections that we're going to talk about. And before we move on to start to talk about pitching and some of your GDD assignments coming up in that, just some general tips when you're creating a game design document. So I said this before, but everyone on the team needs to work on the game design document. There's a few different reasons for this, and it's not just because it's a group project and that's what makes it fair. Game development is insanely multidisciplinary, as I'm sure you have all figured out by this point. It is art, it is programming, it is design, it is business, it is composing, it is all of these things built together. Having everyone in your team work on your game design document helps to make it so that everyone on the team will be able to speak each other's language. So by having your artist kind of write the art direction section, the programmers will be able to be on the same page with the artists and know what the artists are talking about when you're talking about this mood board that you made and the ambience that you're going for with the color grading in this one section. It might sound like jargon if you're not familiar with some of those more artistic technical terms. By having all of this laid out in the document, everyone reading through it, everyone contributing to it, it will make it much easier for everyone to speak each other's language. It can also help to delegate responsibilities among team members. So having everyone work on the GDD, you work on this section because you're chiefly the programmer. You work on this section because you're chiefly the artist. You work on this section because you're chiefly the designer. And if you're at the beginning of your project and you don't really know who wants to do what yet, everyone kind of working on those sections together can maybe help you figure out what you'd be most excited to work on and help to delegate that responsibility later on. So some other tips for making an effective GDD once you've kind of sorted out who's doing what: include as many visuals as you can. And I say this both because it will net you a higher grade on your GDD assignments, but the reason it will net you a higher grade is because visuals are really helpful in terms of understanding not only how your game is going to look, but how it's going to function. If you've got a really complicated game loop, remember how last class we talked about the idea that a core game loop is really simple, but then it might have a secondary or tertiary loop wrapped around it. We might have gameplay loops feeding into each other. For example, you might have one loop for combat and one loop for exploration and one loop for crafting that all sort of feed into one another. Visualizing that just based on paragraphs and paragraphs of text can be really difficult. So including lots of visuals can help you to understand more in depth how your game is going to work. Prioritize clarity and organization. So this is an interesting point. When I say this, what I basically mean is don't focus on making your document super, super pretty and, appealing to a publisher or something like that. For the purposes of just an internal GDD, you want to prioritize making it easy to find the information that you need to understand your game. It's not about just having something super flashy like the BioShock document where you look at the second page and it's pulling you into the world of Rapture. It's about being able to reliably find information on any aspect of your game that the reader wants to. So, if I want to know about the gameplay, where do I go? If I want to know about the environments, where do I go? That should be your top priority, making sure that information is there and it's easy to find. And once you do have a document that's kind of organized and information is easy to find and you have the requisite visuals, if those things are true, you will have, by default, a document that looks professional and presentable. If it's well organized and it has appropriate visuals, it's going to look good. You don't have to spend a lot of time putting together something that's, got a lot of extra flair just for it to be something that's appealing and functional as a document to pitch your game to others. So speaking of pitching, that is the next thing we're going to talk about in the lecture. The section of the lecture is a bit longer than the first, so I'm going to have everyone take a break right now. If you want to stretch your legs, get something to drink, get something to eat, use the washroom, we're going to come back around 6:15. And if anyone has any questions between now and then, feel free to unmute yourself and ask or post in chat, and I'll just stick around until we come back at 6:15. For the activity at the end of the lecture, to answer your question, Mohit, jumping ahead a bit, but yeah, for the activity you'll be later today, for anyone who's curious, you'll basically be choosing any two sections of a GDD that you want and outlining those sections for the game of your choosing. So it can be an existing commercial game. I would even be okay if you picked a personal project or something like that and just outline what those sections would be for your GDD. They don't have to be polished or final. You don't have to create your own assets for it or anything like that. It's just kind of an exercise to get you started on crafting a GDD. What's the game on my background? It's probably changed by now, but Breath of the Wild is one of the screenshots I have up there, yeah. Is the activity individual? It will be individual, yes. Most of the tutorial activities will be group. Some of the lecture activities will be group. Some of them will be individual. It's kind of a mixed bag, but this week it'll be individual. Self-promotion up ahead. Really, I'm more just using it, one of the games we worked on, as an example to demonstrate good and bad pitching because it's something that I'm familiar with. But Sivanish, how has my day been? I think I remembered how to pronounce your name. I'm not 100% sure. It's been pretty good. Thank you for asking. I was working earlier on a fancy over-engineered particle system for a tutorial that I am prepping for another class that I'm teaching in a couple of weeks. You 100%ed both Ori games this weekend, and they were amazing. I think I 100%ed the first Ori. I don't think I did all of the extra content that came in the definitive edition, but close to it. I haven't played Will o' the Wisps yet. It's another one of those games on my backlog that I mentioned earlier. And yep, to anyone who's just kind of floating back, we're on a break right now. So if you want to go grab some water or anything like that, now is the time. And the activity today, to answer your question from chat, Kevin, is going to be about outlining a game design document for an existing game. There's instructions at the end of the lecture. You can feel free to have a look at that now if you'd like. But there will be time at the end of class for you to work on it. It will be due at midnight, same as always. And my expectations in marking it will be level with if you only had the time in class to work on it. So I don't expect it to be really great, mostly, point form. I'm just looking for you to kind of demonstrate understanding of what we talked about today. I'm not looking for you to create your own visuals or anything like that. You'll have probably about somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour at the end of class sectioned off to work on that. So my expectations will be level with if that's all the time you had to work on it, that's what my expectations are. There's no word limit for the activity. And you can pick the game that you'll use for today's activity. Is your final mark going to be off the average of the in-class activities? That portion of your grade, yes, I think it's 15%. I'd have to double check the course outline. In total will come from the lecture activities, and I think 10% from the tutorial activities, since we have slightly more lecture activities in the final analysis, I believe, and more of them are individual as well. And I tried OSU once, I think. Not very well, even though I have a tablet.
I just have a question. So,
yep.
Since this is a one-person project and is due tonight, one-pager design probably is preferable, right?
Oh, well, you only really need to mock up 2 sections, and it can just be like a Word document that's mostly point form with some images dragged in from Google Images or something like that. I'm not looking for it to be, super, super presentable. You can do a 1-page format if you'd like. Basically, whatever is easiest for you.
So what do you mean by just 2 sections?
Oh, well, I'll explain at the end of the lecture, but for tonight's activity, it's basically kind of picking any 2 sections that we talked about. So, characters, story, world, gameplay, design summary, target audience, that sort of thing, and mocking up what those sections might look like for the game that you pick.
Oh, okay, because I'm already starting to stress over it.
Oh yeah, no, don't worry about it. There's some instructions on the last slide. I'll go over it at the end of class, and you will have enough time in class to completely finish it and get the full mark if you just use the 45 minutes or so that we have at the end of class. So don't stress about it.
Thank you.
No worries. There's a new Donkey video on Super Mario Galaxy. That's the best news I've heard all day. Thank you for that, Ricardo. Can we watch it? I don't think we have time right now. I can put it on after the lecture. Yeah, okay. We'll put it on after the lecture, and anyone that doesn't want to be subject to Donkey, which I don't understand why someone wouldn't want that, but if you don't, you can feel free to mute the tab after that happens. Which do I like more, Bloodborne or Dark Souls? Is this the part where I admit that I've never actually? Well, I played some Dark Souls 3, but I couldn't even beat the first boss because I'm so horribly uncoordinated that I just slammed my head against it for 45 minutes and that was it. I do have a close friend who's played both, and I think slightly prefers Dark Souls. Yeah, I'm trying to get good. I'm working on it. I spend too much time on lecture prep and not enough time, crushing bosses in Dark Souls. So I'm sorry about that. You know what? Instead of prepping for the next 8 lectures, I'm just going to play through Dark Souls and I'll stream during the lecture time. That would probably be better, right? Maybe I'll make a Twitch account. Well, I have a Twitch account. Maybe I'll actually stream on Twitch at some point later in the semester once I'm done all the programming prep that I have to do for my other course, so that you guys can watch me humiliate myself. Still better use of a lecture time slot than entrepreneurship. Oh my God, the shade in the chat right now. It's a good thing this recording is unlisted. Back to your final grade is going to be the average of all the assignments. There's going to be out of a total mark. Winston, I think it might be best for you to look at the course outline. There is a section on how your final grade is calculated that will probably make things a bit clearer. Different assignments are worth different amounts. The in-class activities all end up being worth about like 1.5% each out of your final grade. The bulk of your grade will come from your assignments and the aligned components of your GDW. Okay, so it is 6:15, so we are going to get back to it. And yeah, I think I still have the slides up. Yes, I do. Okay, great. So now we are going to talk about pitching. So quick show of hands in the chat. Who likes public speaking? I see basically about half of I don't mind or yes, that's me, and probably a slightly larger half that says I hate it. No, I don't like public speaking. I'm actually a big fan of public speaking. As you can probably tell, that's why I chose to be a lecturer. But this second half of the lecture is going to be about public speaking, particularly pitching. So let's quickly talk about what a pitch actually is. So a pitch is a short presentation. It's usually somewhere between 30 seconds and 5 minutes. I know that's a pretty big range, proportionally speaking. That really depends on the context. If you are talking to someone at a business gathering and you're just networking and you want to quickly tell them that your business is the best idea ever and you're going to make millions of dollars, please give me money, it's going to be more on the 30-second side. If it's longer form and you're at something like an entrepreneurship competition or you're pitching your game on stage at E3, it's going to be more on the order of that 5 minutes or 30 minutes if you're Ubisoft and you've got the stage for 3 hours. You might have visuals to accompany a pitch, or it might be entirely verbal. Typically a pitch is scripted. Being able to ad lib a pitch for an idea is a really, really helpful skill that comes in handy in very unusual situations. I'll give you an example. In one of my classes in 4th year, our professor unexpectedly brought someone in who represented an investing firm from Northumberland that was looking to give some government grant money to local startups, and said, who wants to come up and pitch your game idea right now? So a few of the groups went up and pitched, and our group was one of them, and we just kind of had to ad lib what our idea was, but we actually ended up talking to that investment group as a result and getting some grant money that we were able to use to help fund our project when we were working on it in 4th year. So being able to pitch on the spot is a really helpful skill, though usually for a contest or a conference or something like that, you will have a script that you're following. The goal of a pitch is to convince someone of the quality of something. This might be an entire business. This might be an idea for a game or a movie or a product, or it might be an existing product or program that you're trying to sell to someone. So in this program, the game development program, generally speaking, when you're pitching, you're going to be pitching your game idea. You're going to pitch your game idea so many times in so many different courses. I am not going to lie to you. Most of your courses will probably have a brief oral presentation at the end of the class that amounts to, please pitch your GDW game to us and make it good, because we've seen, the hundreds of pitches at this point, and we want to see something kind of off the wall and interesting. So more about kind of what is a pitch and some different types of pitches. You might hear the term elevator pitch. It's probably something that you'll hear in entrepreneurship if you haven't heard it already. An elevator pitch is something that's entirely verbal, and the reason it's called that is that it's as if you were talking to someone in an elevator. So imagine you run into the CEO of Nintendo for some reason on an elevator, probably in Cirque, and you've got about 20 or 30 seconds before the other person gets off the elevator where you turn to them and, like a normal human, the first thing you do is you pitch your business idea to them and try and get money. So that's where the name elevator pitch comes from. The idea is that it starts when the doors close, it ends when they open. You'll see a lot of really cringeworthy elevator pitch competitions where there's an actual elevator with doors opening and closing, or a projector in the background that has elevator doors opening and closing. Being able to pitch in 20-30 seconds is a useful skill, though. So all of the hype around elevator pitches does have a rhyme and reason to it. So you should always be ready to pitch your game, and not just because, the amount of pitching assignments in this program is such that you can pretty much expect that one of your professors will turn around at any moment and go, I want you to pitch your game now, 5% of final grade, please pitch your game. You never know when you're going to be in one of those situations where maybe you meet someone who works with a publisher or an angel investor or something like that, and you might have an opportunity to get a bit of cash for your team or a bit of exposure or something like that. Pitches can be more or less formal depending on the context. So you might be doing something super formal where you're talking about revenue projections and platforms, and the history of video games in Canada is that they contribute to $4 billion to our GDP every year. Or it might be something really informal where you're just having a casual conversation with someone who works with a publisher, and you're just kind of talking through the mechanics of your game and that sort of thing. So why might you want to pitch? Well, essentially to sell your game. And you might be selling your game to a number of different people depending on the context. So you might be selling your game idea to your team. If you're at the start of a GDW project and you're fighting about what you actually want to do for your project and, accomplish nothing for 48 hours as a result, I totally haven't done that myself. Being able to pitch your ideas can help you show the rest of your team what's inside your head, how good your idea is, how cool it is, how cool your vision is, and actually kind of set off your project with a strong creative vision. You might also be pitching your game to your players to convince people that your game is worth their time and hard-earned cash. You might also be pitching to investors to get them to give you money to actually buy a stake in your company if you're running your own indie studio. You might also be pitching to publishers, so convincing them to sell your game for you to maybe fund part of your development in exchange for a royalty and that sort of thing. So just as a quick survey, who here is kind of interested in being an indie developer or working with an indie developer or working on kind of their own idea rather than working at a large company in the industry? Okay, so I'm seeing pretty much everybody in the chat is either a strong yes on that or a possibly, which is great to see. I think this program in particular is actually really great if you want to start your own company as an indie developer. We actually kind of have incentives to do that in fourth year, both for credit and some grant opportunities as well. So that's fantastic. You're definitely in the right place. So what do you really want to work on? Like if you had to express, what you want to do with your own ideas in a few words, what would that be? The first VR MMO. Very cool. Narrative turn-based games. Halo 6. Team Cherry 2.0. Nice. Real-life simulator, but with aliens. I like it. Immersive sims, short and accessible. Make a difference through games. A noble cause. Games for education and training and therapeutic reasons and things like that. It's actually something we'll dip our toes in next week in the course. Horror story-driven games, Halo 7. I see the one-upsmanship is starting. Rhythm-based journey, narrative RPGs, nostalgic platformer, express yourself. Okay, this is fantastic. So every single one of you that's just put an idea in chat, every single one of you that said yes or maybe when I talked about the idea of working on your own, you all need to learn how to pitch. It is a really important skill. You as an individual need to learn how to pitch. If you have something that you're passionate about that you want to work on, if you're interested in being an indie, you need to know how to pitch. And when you're working on a small team, generally speaking, the person who's most comfortable with public speaking is going to be doing most of the pitching, but everyone on your team needs to be able to sell your idea to anyone at a moment's notice, because you never know when that opportunity is going to come up. Okay, so if you've ever watched Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, think of the best pitch you've ever seen where you thought, oh, that product was really cool. Or you know what, hell, think of E3 and think of the best presentation you ever saw and that made you really think, oh, I want to play that game. Or if I was a publisher, boy, would I have hopped on this game if someone had told me about this game before E3. Doom 2016, good example there. For me, it was No Man's Sky. I don't know whether I'm ashamed or proud to admit that. But the original E3 pitch with the kind of whole, you can go anywhere and you can do anything and it's a quintillion planets, that sort of thing. It killed me. I loved it. So everyone kind of has that really memorable pitch in their head. That's where you really want to try to get. You can get there too. There's no special skill with pitching that's super difficult to learn. It's not that you're just a naturally gifted orator or something like that. It all comes down to experience. Bringing me to the next reason why you want to pitch: to improve your presentation skills. The first few times you ever pitch, whether it's in front of a crowd of people or in front of a crowd of stuffed animals and your bewildered mother that's wondering why you've just said the same thing 10 times in a row, it's going to be terrible the first few times you do it, and that's okay. I remember the first few times that I was ever rehearsing a presentation when I was in elementary school or whatever, you know, I was super nervous. I forgot what I wanted to say, that sort of thing. But you practice and you kind of, as long as you can get interested in what you're talking about, you become better at it. As long as you're passionate about what you're presenting, you can be a good presenter. And if you're not passionate about what you're presenting, then you need to find a new project to work on, because that in game development is essential more than anything else. So, gonna have a little bit of fun here. I'm gonna show you how not to pitch right now. Okay, so this is my game idea. I wanted to talk to you guys today. It's called it's this game about like you go from one place to another and there's like puzzles and stuff. So it's called Portal because you make you have this gun and like you teleport with it, I guess, or whatever. It's just like there's portals. So there's stuff in the levels that you take and you move it around, and then you do the puzzles, and like there's a story that you go through, and basically it's like you might think it's cool with the whole teleportation thing, so that's kind of what the game is about. So like basically, yeah, buy it. It's an original idea that our group came up with, and we're thinking of working on it like in the next year or something. So yeah, when it comes out, you should definitely play it. Okay, so what was bad about that? Everything, exactly. Fantastic. Crusty.jpg. Yes, that is exactly how I would how I would describe it. Okay, so some of the specifics that are getting pointed out in chat. Chiefly, you sounded dead inside, exactly, monotone, unenthusiastic, you're bored when you're talking about your own game, low energy, no eye contact, sad can pitch, no spirit. You're going to see why that's especially funny in a moment. I give it a sad can out of 10. No organization, no specifics, not really sure what your own game is, and well, you see, and yeah, almost like I didn't know my own game. Exactly. So you're picking out a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about here. So the first thing is the idea of a lack of confidence. So not really knowing what you're talking about, not knowing your own game, not seeming like you have your head inside your pitch and you're confident in what you're saying, that ruins a pitch. Conversely, seeming arrogant can also really ruin a pitch. So if you say that you got the best game ever and everyone should just go and play it because you're the best developer ever, unless you're doing that in a really cheeky way and the humor works, that also ruins a pitch because, well, pardon my French, but this class is PG-13. Nobody wants to buy something from an asshole. So you don't want to seem like that when you're pitching because it's just going to alienate your audience. Seeming underprepared also really ruins a pitch. So all that, yeah, well, so like the fact that I couldn't get to, the portal mechanic until 30 seconds in, you weren't entirely sure what I was talking about. Underprepared can also make a pitch instantly ruined. On the opposite side, seeming too scripted or over-prepared can also make a pitch feel really terrible because suddenly you feel kind of stiff and like you just memorized a script or like you're reading from a script and, it doesn't feel like there's any life to the pitch at all. So in general, I try to stay away from cue cards. For a longer pitch, cue cards can obviously be helpful. If you're working with a projector or you're online or something like that, having a little bit of a script in front of you when you've got all these other distractions can be really helpful. But if you're just pitching in person on a stage, something like that, having as few aids as possible and having more kind of rehearsal and confidence in what you're pitching is really the more valuable preparation. Seeming too nervous can also be a detriment. So having a lot of physical tics or, shaking in your voice and things like that. Nobody is going to care if you're a little bit nervous, if you're a little bit shaky, especially at first, if, you're gesturing too much or something like that. But if you seem really nervous and you're just kind of staring at everyone doe-eyed and you can barely stand still and you stop for like 30 seconds, it's not great. And that is why practicing can be so important. Try not to show it too much. In other words, everyone has nerves. I've got nerves right now. But showing your nerves too much can distract from your message a bit. Your audience will understand if you seem a little bit nervous, but if you're completely jumpy on the stage and you're constantly forgetting what you're going to say, then that is a problem. So I'm going to show you guys a better pitch now. I'm not saying that it's a perfect pitch, but just kind of the standard rigmarole that I would give you for the GDW project that I was working on in my 4th year. So I'm Samantha, and I am from Ominous Games. We're a team of 90s kids, and when we started developing games, the nostalgia of 3D platforming games like Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie just hit us like a rock. So we are actually working on Spirit, which is a modern take on those classic 3D platforms, kind of a callback to that classic feel that you'd get in 90s 3D platforming games. So you play as this little ghost guy here, Spirit, little green guy, going about his business, haunting a house, not bothering anybody, possessing objects as you do. One evening, though, he wakes up and finds that all his other little ghostly friends that were haunting the mansion with him have been captured in traps by an evil paranormal exterminator. So you, as Spirit, need to rescue them. There's a little problem, though. Spirit is kind of useless. He can't run very fast. He can't jump very high. He can't even levitate. Really, he's a sad can ghost, if ever there was one. But he does have one little trick up his invisible sleeve. And that trick is that he can possess things and gain their abilities. So when you're Spirit, you can possess different objects and you can become that object. So if you become a marble, you can dash across the floor and fit through tight spaces. If you become a beach ball, you can bounce around and reach high places that you couldn't otherwise reach. If you become a paper plane, then you can glide around the level, going from one high place to another, soaring through the rafters to rescue your little friends. And we have dozens of other objects that you can possess too. So if you like platforming, puzzles, or just a cute story, if you'd really like to help our little useless friend save his ghosts in the haunted mansion of your dreams, keep your eyes peeled and Spirit will be haunting a house near you. Okay, so now what I'm going to say is give me something to pitch, anything, preferably a bad idea, and we're just going to have a look here among us.
Sad can
Shoes
the
for dogs.
game.
Shoes for dogs.
Sad Can the game. Okay, we're going to pitch Sad Can the game. Okay, I don't have an image for this, so we're just going to look at this red panda here. Hi, guys. I'm Samantha, and I'm from Gavin's Great Games, Inc., and I am here to tell you about the most crippling emotional experience you will ever have, Sad Can the game. From the makers of the original Sad Can storyboard comes a fully fleshed out interactive experience, allowing you to live a day in the life of Sad Can. Feel the sorrow, feel the misery, feel the can opener, rip open the can that is your rib cage and take out the baked beans that is your heart as you witness Sad Can losing his friends one by one and embarking on a journey to bring them back from the recycling bin. If you thought that Undertale gave you tears, if you thought that Ori and the Blind Forest was the most riveting experience, you know nothing, because you know nothing and you have seen nothing until you see the raw emotional power of Sad Can trying to bring his comrades back to life. So if you have a heart, if you play games, if you would like to have your heart crushed by playing a game, you want to play Sad Can, the game. Stay tuned, because 2020 hasn't gotten sad enough yet. Okay, so the idea here, the core of what I want to tell you, is that pitching is not just about a good idea. Though I would say that Sad Can the game is objectively a fantastic idea. Pitching is really about striking a balance. You need to seem confident in what you're saying, but you don't want to seem prepared, like you know what you're talking about, but you still want to seem natural, like you're just having a conversation with the audience. So not to say that either of those pitches was great, though, in Sad Can, I really did have the idea going for me. But comparing those to my Portal pitch, what was better about those pitches compared to the Portal pitch? Emotion. Engagement. Matt, feel free to unmute.
You basically made it a story out of it, as opposed to just going, well, so you do this.
Right. So I had kind of a flow to what I was saying. I was telling a story of what you were going to experience. Enthusiasm, clarity, I didn't stutter, passion. Josh, I think Josh H, it's you that prefers Josh and not Joshua, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great.
So to just hop off of the what he said about the story element, you kind of brought the story to life more than just explaining kind of a few of the mechanics that are in the game that kind of seem cool.
Yeah.
And that's
So
about it.
the idea that I was kind of Lily kind of talked about this in chat as well. The idea that I was focusing on why someone would play the game rather than just how someone would play the game. And sorry, I'm just going to mute you there, Josh, if you're all done. Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks. So yeah, lots of great points here. So let's just look at kind of a summary of these points about what made those pitches better than my original pitch, or what in general you can kind of do to make a pitch great. So firstly, passion and excitement. A lot of people were talking about this in chat, the idea of emotion and engagement, kind of putting together a story that I felt excited about, not just standing here and, you know, saying something that maybe I cared about, maybe I don't, like it's cool, whatever, man. Passion is chiefly the most important thing in making a pitch great. This comes with a caveat, though. You don't want to overact. You want to seem genuine. And, you know, I was hamming it up a bit with the sad can, and sometimes that really works depending on what you're trying to sell. But you don't want to seem phony. It doesn't want to seem like you're pandering to the audience and just getting excited for the sake of being excited. You need to seem genuinely invested in what it is that you're talking about. Confidence, another big one here. Again, this has to be genuine. Believe it or not, people can tell when you're faking confidence. And I don't mean that in the sense that, you know, if you're nervous and you're trying to hide that, people can tell, because generally speaking, that comes with practice and you can do that pretty well. What I mean is that if you don't actually know what you're talking about, people will see through it if you're trying to BS it on stage. You should know your own game well enough to be confident when you're talking about how it works. If you don't, then again, you're probably working on the wrong project, and at the very least, you want to review that GDD, you want to talk to your team, you want to make sure that you have a clear vision for your game, or you're not going to be able to pitch it confidently at all. Smiling and body language. So this is something that unfortunately can't come through quite as well in the online format, though you probably noticed, hopefully with the resolution of this webcam at least, that I was making more eye contact with where you would be in those other pitches, as opposed to the first one where I was kind of looking down or to the side and that sort of thing a lot. Body language is another one. Again, it's something that we'll look at a bit in a couple of videos that we're going to look at. It's easier to convey on a stage, but basically the idea of kind of standing up straight, gesturing a bit kind of to emphasize your points, not slouching, not turned away from the audience, having open body language that's welcoming the audience in, as opposed to slouching and cowering away. Subverting expectations. So, you know, you go into a pitch and you expect one thing and then something else comes out. This is not always going to be the case, but, you know, if we go into Sad Can the game and we just expect a regular description of an RPG or something like that, and we come out thinking that the player's heart has been compared to a can of baked beans, having that little subversion in there can help to make a pitch more interesting and memorable. So if a bit of humor is appropriate, throw it in. Every audience will appreciate it, unless you're talking to the most boring board of directors in the world. And even then, you know, why not liven up their mundane, depressing lives with a little bit of fun? So if you're using visuals, also make them great and time them well. Obviously, this does not apply to the Sad Can pitch because I had no idea what I was going to be talking about. But you'll notice with the Spirit pitch as opposed to the Portal pitch, I had some topical kind of high resolution screenshots. I had a little video that was timed out with what I was saying. Whereas with the Portal pitch, I was just kind of going back and forth between a logo that was really hard to see and a really low resolution, you know, needs more JPEG level of quality screenshot. So, what I'm going to say now is that we're going to learn from the two Steves, and I know this is a little bit cheeky. Just going to set up the audio mix here. Let me know if the audio is coming through too loud or too quiet. We're basically going to look at Steve Jobs' original pitch for the iPhone, which is a couple minutes long, which is what I would say a really great pitch, irrespective of how you feel about Apple or Steve Jobs. And then we're going to look at something that Steve Ballmer did when he was at Microsoft for a company retreat, which is, you know, not such a great pitch. So here is Steve Jobs' original iPhone
Today,
pitch.
We're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, three things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not three separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Okay, so hopefully that came through all right for everyone. Oh, Isaac, did you have something to share?
Yes, a fun fact of sorts with the iPhone presentation. On the side of preparation, on the little table, I learned this back in grade 10, on the little table that he had in the side,
Yeah.
for any time he would show like something on the iPhone, it was a completely different iPhone to never run the risk of it dying while he was holding it. So they had like 15 iPhones on that table.
That's fantastic. That's like on a cooking show where they always have, and just to show you, I baked this one a couple hours ago and here it is. And, here it is after I frosted it. And here it is after I put the decorations on. That's really interesting, though. So the thing I'd like to point out two major things about why I think this pitch is really great. And the first one, remember for context, this is 2007. The iPhone was in a lot of ways the first widely available modern smartphone. It was the first famous smartphone. The iPhone was kind of the thing that set off modern smartphone design. Not to say that Apple was completely original in any of the aspects of the design, but they were the first to kind of put it together and make it available to the consumer market. So the whole idea of there being a reveal that this was one device as opposed to three separate devices, it wasn't completely expected. It was a subversion because at the time, this was pretty unprecedented. So having that subversion of expectations is, I think, what makes this pitch really memorable. And what sort of cemented it is, one of those pitches that you'll get shown in entrepreneurship class and, as it turns out, game design. The second thing is about level of enthusiasm. So Jobs here isn't hyper enthusiastic. He's not screaming. He's not even really grinning or anything like that. And honestly, he was kind of laid back in general, but the style works for him because he has a good lead in and he still takes a convincing and creative angle. And you can tell that he's still interested in what he's talking about, even if he's not being, super go-getter, this is the best thing ever type of thing. So now we're going to have a look at Steve Ballmer. Not to hate on Steve Ballmer too much, but he wasn't the best public speaker. So this is from an internal company motivation thing at Microsoft. I'm actually just going to turn down the volume a little bit because I think this is going to be a little bit loud and I don't want to blow out anybody's headphones.
Come on! Who said sit down? I got 4 words for you. I love this company. Yes!
So most of you who know Steve Ballmer's presentations are probably familiar with developers. And that's really something quite similar to that. Oh yes, that was 5 words. I love this. No, it was 4. It was 4. But anyways, the point is, this comes off as really over enthusiastic, right? It comes off as kind of fake, like, you don't love your company that much, dude. It comes off as uncontrolled too. He seems unhinged. He lost his breath for like 15 seconds. this is not how you present to a group of people with what seems as genuine enthusiasm. Oh yeah, control. Yes, counts as the fifth word. Okay, yeah, I'll allow it. So he was both over enthusiastic and incorrect in his pitch. So Steve Ballmer is kind of famous for this really over the top style where he gets out of breath and, super sweaty and he's screaming at the audience. And that's just an example of kind of going too far. So Jobs is, really laid back and reserved, but he still seems confident. He still seems like he cares what he's talking about. This is the cautionary tale of not going too far when you're pitching and seeming too enthusiastic. So just one more video that we're going to watch real quick as another reference for how not to pitch. This is referred to sometimes as the worst Dragon's Den pitch from the British Dragon's Den. And let's see if we can pick out some of the reasons why.
Kidimoto, since 2004, is the award-winning designer, developer, distributor, manufacturer of unique wooden balance bikes for 2 to 5 year olds. Balance bikes are the perfect way to start children onto cycling. Customers include John Lewis, Evans Cycles, Honda, Suzuki, Triumph, to name but a few. We project that sales revenues will hit the £5 million mark in 2014. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Chad has already talked about some of the things wrong with this pitch. No eye contact, his nerves are showing, literally put you to sleep, lack of confidence, lack of energy. And this is kind of an example of how sometimes if you're not dealing with nerves in the right way, that over presence of nerves can actually manifest itself as a lack of energy, a lack of confidence, a lack of enthusiasm. He's not smiling, he's not making eye contact. If he was nervous and kind of shaking a bit and stuttering over some of his words, as long as he was enthusiastic and seemed to know what he was talking about, you wouldn't really hold it against him. But when you're talking about the fact that your product has won awards and that your customers are big companies like Honda and Suzuki, why are you staring at the floor and just listing off names when you do that as if you don't care about your product at all? The fact that he seems really unprepared is really that's kind of the crux of it, right? It seems like he doesn't care about what he's talking about because he's not really prepared for it. He's just listing off names with no real emphasis. That's all the pitch comes down to. The kid did better than the guy. Sums it up beautifully. Josh, yeah? Did you want to share something?
Yeah, real quick. He was stopping after every word. He was like, so our company is related to all of these different manufacturers.
That is a great point. Timing is really something that can make or break any presentation, and it gets really irritating so quickly when someone just has no vocal cadence whatsoever. So that's yet another thing that kind of that lack of preparedness and overabundance of nerves, if you want to call it that, can have that effect on a pitch, and it's something that can instantly ruin the flow of your presentation. The sloth from Zootopia, yeah, that is something that this guy's vocal meter or cadence is really reminiscent of. So now that we've seen some good pitches, some bad pitches, and a little bit of in between, but if we're being real here, mostly good and bad, let's talk about some strategies that you can use to make sure that your pitch is going to be more on the good side beyond, be enthusiastic and confident. I'm sure that's easy to say, but if you hate public speaking, it's like, okay, yeah, but what do I do really? So let's talk about some practice strategies for pitching. And I will talk about, chat's asking about the No Man's Sky pitch from E3. Yeah, maybe we can dig that out after the lecture. We'll watch it after the donkey video. So some practice strategies, and these are strategies that I've used myself as well. Practice with lots of distractions. This is one that I personally find to be super effective, especially if you're working with a script or anything that you need to memorize. So put headphones on with really loud music so that you can't hear yourself talk and kind of dance around. Do headstands, dance around the room, have someone from your family come and bother you while you're practicing, and just try and see if you can remember what you're supposed to say and actually deliver it with the correct timing with all of these distractions. So after you've practiced a couple times and you're like, okay, I know my script, I know what I'm going to say. When you actually get up there on stage, dealing with the audience and dealing with nerves and everything, it puts on extra stress. So if you can introduce that extra stress to yourself while you're practicing, it will be much easier for you to actually pitch in front of a crowd of people. If you can give a well-prepared, poised, timed, enthusiastic speech with exactly what you want to say, with loud metal music on, you can't even hear yourself think, then it's not going to be a problem for you when you're out in front of your classmates. If you can recite your pitch under these conditions, in essence, nerves aren't going to be as much of an obstacle once you get to the real thing. And if you make a mistake at home while you're practicing with your headphones on, you look ridiculous, who cares? Nobody can see you anyways, and you've been locked inside for 6 months either way. So if you're memorizing a script, what I like to do a lot of the time is retype it or write it without looking. So grab a piece of paper or grab your keyboard and try and type out exactly what you're going to say without looking at your original copy. This will help you reinforce what you're going to say in your head, and it'll also make you think of new words on the fly if you forget a sentence or something like that. It'll help you kind of reinforce your key talking points in your head. The lesson here from neuroscience, though obviously this is not a neuroscience course and I am far from a neuroscientist, is that multiple forms of rehearsal will improve your recall. So speaking and writing or even drawing or kind of gesturing, as opposed to actually just listing out what you're going to say over and over and over again, help you remember things better. If you write it out and you type it out and you speak it and you try and summarize it in 60 seconds for a 5-minute pitch, all of these different ways of rehearsing will help you recall the pitch better when it comes time to actually spit it out in front of an audience. So some strategies for dealing with nerves. And for anyone that said that they hate public speaking, I'm guessing by and large, nerves is probably the reason why you hate public speaking. So here's some tips for how you can start to deal with that if you don't have a ton of experience or it makes you really nervous. So do as much as you can beforehand. I'd love to say that there's some panacea that you can do on stage, like, picture the audience naked. That doesn't really help. It's honestly just kind of like, what are you supposed to add picturing the audience naked to the other 99 things you have to keep track of while you're up on stage? What you really want to do is do as much as you can to soothe nerves beforehand. And no, that does not mean drugs, Jordan. I mean, I know pot's legal now, but let's keep it in check here. Get plenty of sleep the night before. I know that's easier said than done in university, but if you're banking all of your sleep points into one night for the week, make it the night before your presentation. Practice twice as much as you think you should. This will help kind of your confidence in what you're supposed to say. And drink lots of water. Cottonmouth is something that you will get on stage very quickly, especially if you're not used to public speaking. Make sure that you're drinking lots of water or milkshake or whatever your poison of choice is, not alcohol. That will just make things worse before your pitch, and that will help you once you get up on stage. Look to friends in the audience. So rather than trying to picture the audience naked or something like that, depending on the situation, you might not always have a friend in the audience, but if you're going to a conference or something like that and you can invite a friend to be in the audience while you're speaking, having a friendly pair of eyes to look at is really, really helpful. So if you're presenting in class, I'd ask a few friends in the class, probably your GDW group and maybe a couple other people that you're close to. We all know that during class presentations, you're paying attention, but you've probably got a Twitch stream open on your laptop or something, and you're just kind of staring at that and occasionally looking up to pretend like you're paying attention. Ask a couple people in the class to actually really pay attention during your presentation, to look at you and smile so that they can look at you and feel like you're talking to a friend as opposed to just talking to a crowd of people that are all judging you super hard. Elastic band trick. Okay, so this is something that I picked up in a couple of pitching competitions I did. I'll just show you here. So elastic, scrunchie, whatever you choose. Put it around your wrist and just kind of, this one's a little loose, gently flick it kind of before you go on stage, just kind of backstage while you're going over your pitch in your head, and fidget with it a little bit if you feel like you need to be doing something with your hands while you're presenting, as opposed to digging your nails into your wrist or clenching your jaw every moment that you're not speaking. Having something to fidget with kind of before you present or very subtly during your presentation can be really helpful to squeeze out some of that nervous energy and prevent you from umming and ahhing a lot. Channel that nervous energy into a little bit of a bodily motion as opposed to, a terrified facial expression and constantly pausing in between words. And the last very, very important point here is to get excited about what you're talking about. So channel that nervous energy into your existing passion. This is something you kind of got to learn. It's This might sound a little bit stupid, but you know when Iroh's talking about lightning bending in Avatar, for anyone that's watched that, and you talk about kind of channeling your energy in a very specific way to be able to lightning bend instead of blowing yourself up. It's kind of that idea. So the idea that you have this nervous energy that can be very self-destructive, that can be very harmful, taking that energy and trying to channel it into the passion that you have for your game, thus creating an enthusiastic pitch rather than one that is disastrously nervous. And this does take a little bit of practice. Now, hopefully this excitement will come for free. If you're talking about your GDW project, it'll be something that you're passionate about. If it's a class project that you're not so passionate about, try and find something in it that you can find interesting to help you become interested and passionate about what you're talking about. Okay, so some general tips on presentation. Present as much as you can. Take the opportunity to pitch or present whenever you can. It's great practice. Try and shed the notion of other people judging you. You know, the world's really gone to hell right now anyways. What more do you have to lose? Always talk about something you're interested in. So if you're not interested in what you're saying, how can the audience possibly be interested? I try to apply this to my teaching as well. You know, there's nothing worse than a professor that's totally disinterested in the material and you fall asleep in class. You have no idea what to even pay attention to because the professor doesn't even care what they're talking about. Exact same thing applies to any oral presentation. You need to be invested in what you're saying so that everyone else can be invested in what you're saying. Find a way to make the content interesting for you. Like I said, if you're pitching your own game, hopefully this won't be a problem. Admit what you don't know. So if people ask you questions, be open to that discussion. Admit that you don't necessarily know 100% of what you're talking about and that there might be something that an audience member asks you and you go, you know what? I don't know, but I'm going to look that up and get back to you. Or I don't know, but this is what I do know that's related to that. Don't try and pretend to know what you're talking about when you don't. So I'll give you guys a few minutes if you'd like to prepare for this, but winging it would be appreciated or encouraged. So anyone that would like to pitch, and you can share your screen as well. Let me know if you'd like to share your screen. I see Jonah is volunteering already. So Jonah, feel free to unmute yourself. And would you like to be able to share your screen as well?
No, I'm good enough just sharing video.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Can I begin?
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right, hi fellow classmates. Today I'm going to be pitching to you my VR MMO. So this game that I've been sort of ruminating over for the past couple months has really just been a next step in immersion, where previously in MMORPGs, we've always asked the player to sort of make that leap of imagination and say, oh, well, your character's casting the spell when you press this button. But I'm proposing a world in which when you want to cast a spell, you have to physically move your arms in a specific motion. You are your character. You are surrounded by your world. You are not looking in. You are making real connections. You are not talking to NPCs. You are talking to other people. I personally think that VR being the next place for MMOs is a really big deal. And yeah, that's pretty much my 1 word or 1 minute synopsis of my game. I hope you guys are interested.
Okay, great. So thank you, Jonah. That was great, actually. Really good job. Jonah, I think the best thing about that pitch was you seemed super invested and enthusiastic in what you were talking about, and you made a great case for why VR would be the more immersive option for an MMO experience. You kind of stayed true to that idea of immersion being the key selling point, and I think that made your pitch really persuasive towards the audience. I see Mohit has a question.
Yeah, sorry, I just missed like the beginning of class. I wasn't like feeling well, so like would I like lose marks for like participation or something, or?
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. The recording will be posted so that you can catch up on the information, and we haven't announced the exercise yet, so you'll be on time for that. No worries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so would anyone else like to come up and pitch?
Can I do a quick pitch? Then it can be anything, right?
Yeah, it can be anything.
Okay.
Can be a game, can be a product, can be a business, can be something imaginary, whatever you want.
Okay.
Do you want a screen share or?
No, my camera will be fine.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, fellow classmates of the Game Development and Entrepreneurship Program. Today, I will be introducing my half-eaten dinner. And you might think that my half-eaten dinner is extremely disgusting and very unsanitary during the COVID-19 pandemic. You could be correct. However, or Order now. Look at some hand sanitizer. Before I ate my half-eaten dinner, it was fully not eaten before. I used my hand sanitizer. Order now, and you can get an empty bowl of toothpicks. Limited time offer.
That was fantastic. Okay, so the thing I would say about Winston's pitch is that it did a fantastic job with that concept that we talked about of subverting expectations. So basically, the notion being that you did not expect to be pitched a half-eaten dinner, but the fact that that was what the pitch was about, coupled with the enthusiasm, the humor, made you really want to buy that half-eaten dinner by the end of that 60 seconds. Something just to keep track, because I know we have a few volunteers popping up in chat. I've been trying to keep track of them on the side here. If we could move the kind of chatter to the Discord so that I can keep track of who's volunteering to go in the Google Meet, that would be great. And I've got that open here too, if there's anything in the Discord. Okay, so starting from, I think the person who posted highest up with volunteering to go that hasn't gone already was Stevie. So if you'd like to present, go right ahead, Stevie. Yep, no worries. Get your camera on there. Oh, someone else can go first. Okay, so the next person that I saw posted after Stevie was Mateo.
Can you see me?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay, so what's going on, students? My name is Mateo, and today I'm going to be presenting you a brand new Rubik's Cube. It's actually called a void cube, so you guys have all seen Rubik's Cubes like this, and like this, and this, and they're all pretty fun to solve. It's not very tricky, but something that's crazy about this is it has no centers. You can put your finger right through. I know what you're thinking. Don't do what you're thinking at all. But yeah, this is a new and improved cube. It comes with all new types of algorithms, parodies, anything you can think of. And it makes as a fun game to play with your finger. That's it.
I see that the concept of subverting expectations is going to be a common thread in some of these pitches, and I love it. That was great, Mateo. Very to the point. You did a good job of kind of introducing what the product was, the special feature about it. You seemed confident without seeming arrogant. Very nicely done. I see you've got some other Rubik's. Whoa, okay. Wow, Mateo's not playing today. Wow.
No.
Okay, you came ready to party.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was fantastic. Thank you. Stevie, let us know when you're ready. Until then, the next person I saw was Mark. Oh, you're good? Okay, so we'll go to Stevie first.
Camera seems to be working. While I was waiting, I looked around for some things that I could possibly pitch. And one thing I found when I was looking around my room was I have a lot of leftover textbooks. So I would like to introduce you to Stevie's Textbook Emporium. In our Textbook Emporium, we have things like sensation perception. Have you ever done the art and wondered why it looks the way it does? Well, with this book full of many pictures, some of which I had to replicate on exams, you too can learn how the brain works, how perception works. Beyond that, you can find cognition, and beyond that, for an extra bonus if you order right now, I will throw in my personal statistics textbook, which I wrote in my hand myself. And if you would really like, I might even throw in a copy of an award that you can change the name to.
Thank you. That was great. That was enthusiastic. It was unexpected. You clearly had like a whole lineup of the products and services that you offer, which was great. Definitely, yeah. Chat's all in on this as well. Just scrolling back through chat here. Sorry, guys, trying to keep track of who I've got on my list of when to go and when. Okay, we've got. I've got a whole list here. I think I'm seeing everyone that's putting up Fs there. One thing I'd also say, Stevie, for you in particular, since I see that you've clearly got some textbooks related to neuroscience or psychology, and obviously you're interested in game design, a book you may find interesting is called The Gamer's Brain by Celia Hodent. It's kind of an intersection between neuroscience and game design, so you might want to check that out if neuroscience is kind of one of your interests. Okay, so next up in chat, I saw Mark.
Okay, my monitor doesn't have a webcam, so just imagine. I'll give you a kind of a brief backstory. Oh, hi. Who are you? Oh, CEO of Nintendo. Hi, my name is Mark Bowser, Doug Bowser. Hi, nice to meet you. So I have a new game. It's called Death Stranding 2, and it's really cool. We have the best graphics. We're using the entirely new engine. It came out last month. Best graphics, never before seen in a game, all the ray tracing, and you've heard of Death Stranding 1. You know how the walking wasn't very good, but we have completely remade it. It's how can I say? You just have to find out when you're there, right? When you're there sitting playing the game, that's when you're going to find out how we changed the walking. We turned to a turn-based combat game as well. That's how you're going to deliver everything. I can't spoil the story for you, obviously. And we have Hideo Kojima, a classic designer, video game legend behind this game. Oh, you're getting off of the floor. Okay, yeah, see you. Just call me. Yeah. All right, see ya, bro.
Very nicely done. I like the explicit framing as an elevator pitch, and I just got this distinctly Donkey vibe from your pitch, which I really enjoyed. Great enthusiasm, kind of verging on that comedic arrogance there almost with talking about all the ray tracing and best graphics ever. Very nicely done. Okay, so I think we've got 5 more volunteers with maybe about 5 minutes before we got to move on. So let's take first up Ricardo.
Birds. They're so majestic. They're so beautiful the way they fly. But what if we reinvented birds? All right, we took away the flying. Instead, we added swimming. We took away the wings. Instead, we added skin. That's right. Today, I'm here to introduce something very special. It's a bird. It's almost like a fish. It's a mobile communications device. It's a penguin.
That was fantastic. That was really well done. The mobile communications device got me as well. I got to remember to mute my mic or I'm going to burst out laughing during some of these pitches. Very great job pitching birdfish to us. Really, I don't think that I can say any more about that won't be said already in chat. So moving on to Natasha now.
You know of geese. You know of bears. But do you know the worst animal of all? Squirrels, the game. Don't feed them the nuts. Trust me, don't feed them the nuts. It's not worth it. You'll die. I'm totally not saying that this game will totally cause your death in real life. That's not what I am implying. I am just implying that if you feed the squirrels, you will die. They will burrow into you. Shoot, sorry, I read the comments. Already.
That's okay. That was good. I liked where that was going. The Google Meet chat does have the destructive potential to derail anything. I like the reference to the classroom rules there. If that was intentional, then great callback there. Nathaniel?
All right, can I share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna double check that that'll be allowed with the controls. Yep, you should be allowed to share your screen. I'll just unshare mine for a second.
All right, so everybody learned, at least I hope everybody learned in elementary school, how to draw 1-point perspective. You put a little point in the middle, you draw a little shape, and then you connect it. And that gives you the illusion of 3D. What if I told you that video games use a very similar method to this, and that it's incredibly primitive and incredibly limiting? Because as soon as you try and increase the field of view to something higher, you end up with this weird tunnel vision, and everything that's important to you, where you're aiming, for example, in a first-person shooter, ending up super compressed and small in the middle of the screen. Now, with the way math is done in video games, this is seeming to be the only way to project a three-dimensional image, which is how we see the world, onto a two-dimensional screen. But that's not the only way. There is another representation that is not involved. Pardon me, sorry. Got my layers confused. Because, for example, this point here is further away than this point in reality, but when you view it through rectilinear projection, which is how video games produce their images. Goodness gracious, where are my layers? Those points, for example, 1 and 2 here, 2 is closer, 1 is further away. But here they appear to be the same distance away. That's because this maps based on depth. But when you map based on distance, you end up with an image that appears as humans see the world. Everything vanishes further away from the player as it gets further away. Everything is the actual distance away from the player that it would be in real life. And while this field of view can't even touch 180 degrees without breaking completely and becoming infinitely wide, this one can go all the way to the edge. Goodness, that was a horrible pitch, but
That was an interesting pitch, actually. I'm not from. We're kind of limited to the typical perspective projection. That's, as you said, it's a frustum projection. It's linear, and orthographic projection, which is based on a rectangular prism. Diving a little bit deep into the math for a game design course, but this is interesting, actually. Do you have a source on some of the math for this? I'd be interested to see that. If you want to go ahead and link that in Discord, that would be cool, actually. Okay, so we kind of have to move on now. Josh, Michael, I saw that you had volunteered. Maybe if you want at the end of class after we dive into the work period, if you want to pitch your idea, then we can, but I'm just going to move on for now. So little bit of a sneaky note. Everyone who just pitched, there will be, I'm just going to share the slides again. There will be some bonus marks being added onto your account for your brave volunteering in class. And Josh and Michael, you'll have the opportunity after class today as well. So great job to everyone who volunteered. I didn't expect so many people to volunteer, actually. Why didn't I let you know about that at the start? Because I'm a wily teacher. That's why. But all jokes aside, we might have some more time at the end of class for some more people to pitch in that. So, if you'd like to partake in this, then we can do that afterwards. So a quick introduction to a couple of assignments before I let you go to work on tonight's exercise. The first GDD assignment in this class, there will be a couple of other assignments related to game design documentation, since it is such a huge part of game design and a great way to kind of get your ideas down. Your first GDD assignment will be to create a design document for your second GDW project when that challenge is assigned. And if the timelines in GDW change a little bit and your project is ending a bit later than it was scheduled or something like that, let me know if that timeline in GDW is looking a bit different. I'm going to talk to James about that as well on my end, and the deadline for this assignment might change based on that. This is really just to get you started to think about that. So teams will be assigned for that, I believe, next Monday, but that might be changing. I'm not 100% sure. The GDD can take any format you like. Just remember to include all of the necessary details. So I want you to prioritize clarity and organization above all else. And there is an outline on Canvas that talks about the sections that are required and that sort of thing. It's all available in a rubric on Canvas, which I believe should be available to you now, but I will double check after the class. And again, I'm not 100% sure how the team assignment is going to work for the second GDW challenge. I haven't talked to James about the second set of GDW groups yet, but more details on that as they become available. bit more detail on the GDD assignment. So basically how it's going to be marked is it's out of 10. There will be 3 marks for your game concept and gameplay. So the creativity and quality of your design, whether it's communicated clearly. You're going to be marked for content completion as well. So if you have all of the required sections, those required sections are outlined in the rubric. I'm emphasizing the asset list here because that is one thing that historically people tend to forget on this assignment. So just, don't forget an asset list. There's 2 marks for presentation, including the quality of your images. And when I say quality, I mean mostly relevance and clarity, not necessarily polish. Ideally, we don't want something that looks like it was drawn in Microsoft Paint, but it doesn't have to be something that looks like it's spent, you spent 9 hours to render it in Blender and it's absolutely perfect and that sort of thing. And there will also be 2 marks assigned for formatting and writing quality. So spelling, grammar, style. Is it easy to understand what's in your document? Is it easy to find information in your document and that sort of thing? So that's basically it for this week's content. And next week, we're going to be taking a deep dive into breaking down what it means to interact with a game, how you as a player communicate with a game, how a game communicates with you. That's basically what the core of interaction is, and that's what we will be talking about next week. We're also going to be talking about different types of game interactions that you can have, and things like different genres, platform considerations, how those shape the types of interactions that you have as a player. We'll also talk a bit more about player motivation, the reasons people play games, the reasons games are made, and we will talk more about social interaction as well. So today's activity, which you will be able to work on basically starting right now, is to pick a game of your choosing, probably an existing commercial game, though it can be a passion project if you like, or even your GDW game that you're working on right now if you would like, and create a rough outline for any 2 GDD sections for that game. So slide 16 has a list of example sections that you might find in a GDD, and slide 17 to 25 have details on some of the different sections. We talked about all that earlier. This recording might be available tonight, depending on how long YouTube takes to process it. I'm going to have to double check on that. It does not have to be super polished. I'm basically looking for you to demonstrate a basic understanding of GDD content. And I'm looking for about 2 pages total of basically point form notes, images, sketches. If you're working on a passion project and you'd like to quickly doodle some characters designs that you have or something like that, then you can include your own images, though I don't expect you to do that. And I don't expect you to, have 500 words on a page or something like that. Probably less than a couple hundred words of writing total for this activity. Basically just point form notes of what you would include in that section and some basic details relevant to that game for that section. So if it's a section of characters, who are the main characters in their game? What's like a couple words describing their personality? What function do they serve in the story? That kind of thing. So you can do any sections you want. This is going to be marked from 0 to 1, basically. If you do both sections and you have enough there to kind of give me an idea of what that section would look like in a full GDD, then you're good. You'll get the full mark. If you only include one section, or maybe you're missing a lot of detail, then it'll be more like a 0.5, somewhere in between, like a 0.75, that type of thing. So submit this on Canvas by 11:59 p.m. tonight. My expectation will be that you only had about 30 or 40 minutes to work on it, because that's what the rest of the class is for. I don't expect you to be, chewing up more of your night on this than the next 30 minutes or so. Okay, so my advice for this week outside class is to start making a habit of documenting your game ideas for personal projects, for assignments, for GDW. Keep a record of how you're fleshing out your designs and, what you're doing with your designs. So thanks for listening. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.